Hey, what's going on, guys? So I found an interesting person here on Omegle. So this is John with Just Thoughts. Thank you for being here, man.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah,
You started to slow down a little bit when you started whatever you started, just so you know.
yeah. So when it starts recording, there creates a lag. I have no idea why, but I'm gonna go straight into the conversation. So yeah, are you from America? That's a general question.
Uh, yes.
Okay, good to hear. Good to hear. So yeah, we just found out that our commander in chief has COVID-19. Have you experienced some difficulty wherever you are?
We just found out and meant nothing.
Okay. Well, yeah. So, have you experienced some difficulty with the coronavirus and being able to go out and experience life due to the difficulties that a lot of people are experiencing within being able to go out and whatnot?
I mean, yeah, I think everybody has to a degree. I'll go a little bit personal. I'm an extreme extrovert, and I'm also a combat veteran with PTSD,
Hey,
and
thank you for your service.
it took time after I got out of the military, not a problem. It took time after I got out of the military to figure out how to relearn certain things. And then when that happened, I was okay for a while, but I kind of lost that ability to do both introvert and extrovert because of trauma. And when this happened, I kind of had to start all over again. And there's been great personal growth, but it, it comes at quite a cost at the beginning of this.
Yeah, I'm sure that there are millions of people that have been through those exact same situations, right? And a lot of the hardships really go unseen, and I think that we're doing a bad job at really being able to help those individuals, those citizens that have been through some of those hardships. And one of the things that I think has been beneficial is us being able to acknowledge how those situations are going, right? Like some of the interesting parts about being able to create such amounts of connections through the new technologies that we have access to is the fact that we get to see other people's stories, we get to hear other people's experiences when we go through certain situations versus 10 to 15 years prior we would never have heard if some people go through these kind of difficulties. If you can you give me an example of one of the things that you have realized has been helpful during this coronavirus?
I, the question was something I realized that could be helpful during
Yeah,
this.
like let's say for instance somebody else was going through an experience that you have been through and
Okay.
wanted some insight into how it would be beneficial for him to apply what you've learned to his own life.
So generally, I try not to do that, but I do have an example. For 21 years, I've been a sexual assault and domestic violence crisis volunteer worker.
Good to hear, man.
And
Good to
until
hear.
this happened, it involves getting a phone call and being with that person for a short period of time because it's the crisis part. It's not something that happens after. It's the most recent person I'll meet right after. Like they'll still have their clothes that have blood and stuff on them, right? And so that work that I've done for longer than I've been married can't be done. And so I had to find ways to where I could take the state training and things like that and interact with people. And it's one of the reasons I ended up here. I didn't expect it to be as successful as it was on here because 10 years ago it was not like this. Um, so when I talk to people on here, one of the things I like to say is we we're conditioned, based on society and timeline and age, to not critically think, and that's why we have such division in people who are so willing to accept what they're told because they've been taught to do only that, versus the minority of people who would try to question things and then get shut down and have those other people act out against them. And so when we, the most common thing I found on here is people going, I don't know what to do when I leave here because I used to go somewhere and there'd be 100 people and now I go and there's 10, right? And so my belief is that during this time, the best thing a person can do, if you have not done it before or had access to it, is start studying what types of relationships exist among humankind and how to communicate in regards to those specific relationships. And, it sounds stupid if nobody says, oh, you need to communicate, and they're right. But for the majority of people, the only relationships we're taught are elder and youth. And weird, skewed perspectives of a romantic relationship that primarily come from media and sources that aren't showing proper, healthy those things. But nobody's talking about the fact that your peers are a relationship, your employer-employee relationship. And so we have things like human resources, and they go, these are the things you cannot do.
Right.
But you have a 22-year-old who's been involved in sports his whole life, who goes to college, gets his degree, and he's attractive. And I don't want to be crude, but we all kind of know what happens in your early 20s in college you want to try to do. And he's now working with a subordinate who's 21 and attractive. And literally 2 months prior to that relationship, it would have been completely different. And you're not telling them or teaching them how to communicate in that. You're just telling them what they can't do. And the things they can't do are contrary to human nature.
Right. Right. So from my perspective, I'm hearing a lot of difficulty going on right now with human relation and being able to think critically about the emotional intelligence that we're developing, not only in our scholastic system, but just it being helpful so that we can participate in the society that we're creating, right? Our ability to think critically, like you had just mentioned, is kind of being hindered, right? And I think it's due directly to the scholastic structure that we experience. Like one of the examples that I usually like to give is that the scholastic structure that we see right now, like the institutions that we have, the higher education and collegiate institutions, teach people what to think, not necessarily how to think. And one of the good experiences that I had with going to college for the short duration that I went to college is basically for the teachers that I had, for the professors that I had, to be able to tell me like, hey man, and this is not me trying to be cocky or anything, this is just, this is what they said, trying to get me to understand how I should perceive the world. You're an intelligent guy. You need to make sure that if you're going to go to college, to learn how to think, not necessarily what to think. I'm going to give you the structure that you need, and you have to build upon that structure. And the scholastic experience doesn't end when you go to college. It lasts your entire life. And if you can't become a student of life, if you can't have this mentality that you're going to, continue to learn, even if it's not in the scholastic environment, even if it's from somebody completely random, they have something to give to you so that it would be beneficial for your entire life. You just have to find whatever piece of knowledge is within that person. Like this interaction right here, man, I sincerely appreciate it because you're having a perspective of life that is completely different than the experience that I've been through. But at the same time, you're giving me knowledge that I would have to, spend 10 to 15 years learning, and you're able to do it in a short conversation. So I do appreciate that. You can continue going. I apologize for stopping you.
No, absolutely no. Like, communication is, and again, not to toot my own horn, but I'm 39. I've been married 19 years. I've raised one adult. My second child will be an adult in 6 months. Okay.
Congratulations,
How
man.
do you do that when the average relationship ends in 6 months? Well, we're not taught how to communicate in those relationships. And I was always fascinated in communication because my parents had a shitty relationship. And so, to not go off on that tangent, but to your point, I don't want to promote conspiracy theories. I find them fascinating. And if people would understand that conspiracy theories, the people who follow them, the people who get out of them, they come out of critical thinking. And so I get fascinated with them because only people who critically think will even take the time to go into them. And you mentioned the scholastic system. Now, me personally, I went back very briefly, not like a thesis or anything, but I go, At what point did that start happening? And you can go back even back to ancient Greece and Rome, and I don't know the name of the individual, but he was an advocate for Greece, and his claim to fame was the following statement: you send your children to Caesar's schools, and you wonder why they come home Roman. Okay? And I don't, again, I don't want to pick sides or promote things that I don't have the knowledge of. So the quickest way is the Renaissance happened, and the Renaissance was not just a few people seeing the world and the universe differently and trying to do art. It was the majority. It was almost a reverse in polarities of humankind, where you had more critical thinkers than you did non-critical thinkers.
Right.
And so, whatever the powers that be, well, it wasn't until that happened that you actually had to go to art school to be a successful artist. And the most amazing thing about all of that is that the artists that we know should have not been able to work in art because they didn't finish, or they didn't follow the laws or bylaws that would have been done in that environment. But a known homosexual who had various unverified age ranges for enjoyment as a hedonist was such a talented artist that the Pope could ignore it and hire him to paint the Sistine Chapel, right? And that just goes to show the credit of Michelangelo. But people don't realize he didn't finish school. Da Vinci didn't finish school. And under the rules at the time, they should not have been able to work. And the most frustrating part for me is, oh yeah, that's not that big of a deal until you realize the Renaissance, I believe, was sometime in the 1400s. And we didn't have the modernist movement until the late 1800s, early 1900s, with Picasso and Van Gogh and people like that. And yeah, well, they didn't make money. Yeah, because they couldn't go to school. That's why they couldn't sell their art, because they couldn't get hired to do art. And now, their art's in museums, right? And the scholastic system, you can go through history. Well, I think there was a catalyst that happened after World War II for the majority of the modern world. Now, I don't know why they chose this, other than the fact that it worked really well for Adolf Hitler when he was chancellor, and he did get the country out of a depression, but he was also integral in their public education.
Right.
And
Right.
the one thing he did